and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from all around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture and where you can see these represented in modern day content so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. Before we start, apologies for the radio silence over the last few weeks. I've been really busy but also very unwell and I thought I'd put myself first for a little bit to get back to 100%, and again, I am, thankfully. So thanks for hanging on and thank you to everyone who checked in. For this week though, we are covering the one I said we would 4 weeks ago. So we're heading over to Eastern Europe for the wonderfully spooky Rusalka from Slavic mythology. The Rusalka is typically described as two things really. One is a benevolent water nymph and the other an evil water spirit. However, what all accounts can agree on is what they look like, which is a universally beautiful woman who has long, dark or green hair down to their knees, disproportionately long limbs, and pale, shiny skin. They are always female and always stark naked when you spot them, and you can typically find them around riverbanks or lakes in Slavic countries, where they sit on the beach, in willow trees, or they linger in the shadows. When they aren't out and about, they would live in crystal palaces at the bottom of rivers, waiting for spring when they would come out and hunt. Unfortunately, these ladies are often evil, and their main purpose is to drown men in rivers and lakes they call home. They do this by luring the men, using their body or their voice, where they would entangle their long hair around the feet of the victim and pull them under, where the Rusalka's body would become slippery to the touch, and it would reveal a more distorted version of them, with their skin decaying and hair falling out, and they would actually tickle the man until he drowned as they laugh at it. These monsters are very often considered to be similar to mermaids, or especially sirens from Greek mythology. Half fish or half bird, half woman temptress from the water, who sing to lure their prey into their clutches, so they can drown them for mostly their own amusement. However, the Rusalka are slightly different, as they are not hybrids. They have complete human bodies, complete with legs, and are able to survive on land for a week a year. There are beliefs that the Rusalka were able to change their shape based on a man's preferences to their appearance. However, it is debated, as it is mentioned in folklore that they are universally attractive, meaning they wouldn't need to adapt to attract them, which holds more respect within the Slavic folklore space. They are able to transform their bodies into that slippery form I mentioned earlier, and control their hair as well as their bewitching voices. However, beyond this, they don't have many more powers. Obviously they do live underwater, which is very contradictory to how normal humans live too. Rusalka, though, are actually considered spirits because they are undead. You become a Rusalka by drowning in a body of water, usually through suicide or murder, but usually because you have been wronged by a man. This was often because you were in an unhappy marriage, you were jilted, cheated on, abused, or you were pregnant with either an unwanted or forbidden, aka a fair child, which would make the woman deemed unclean. Once you died and were reborn as a Rusalka, you would live out a predetermined time as one, but your main mission is to seek revenge on all men until the one who wronged you walks on by, and then once you kill them, you are released. They emerge from their homes in the springtime, where they would dance and sing along the riverbeds and encourage the growth of rye. This is a grain if you didn't know. This is because earlier accounts of Rusalka were that they were these benevolent water spirits, I mentioned this earlier, who would transfer the gift of water to the fields and nurture the crops, as well as being fertility symbols for local women, because water and women equals fertility in folklore. We'll get into why this changed over to their evil counterparts later on in their origins, but their task of watering the rye did stick in these evil versions too. It is still their job. However, after the first thunder, they would return to their homes under the waves, waiting for next year's spring to come out. Now, importantly, you cannot kill a Rusalka because they are spirits, they are already dead. However, you generally try and avoid the riverbanks if you were a man around this time. Women would also typically avoid them too, as Rusalka would harass you with slurs and horrible names as you passed, especially young women within childbearing age, and we think this is a reflection of the life that was robbed from them. Now, moving on to etymology, first I need to mention that they have lots of other names within specific Slavic countries, such as Vodyanitsa in Russian, meaning she from the water or water maiden, Kupalka, meaning bather, Shatovka, meaning prankster, Lukotukya, meaning she who tickles, but they are a whole load of Russian ones. In Ukraine, they were called Mavka, meaning the dead, but they are very often considered another monster entirely, and actually we have enough on Mavka separately to do another episode, so I will make sure we have another episode in the works for them at some point. Now, the actual word Rusalka is Slavonic and derives from the word Rusalia, which comes from the Latin Rusalia, which was a name for a main Roman festival, also called Rusalia. As you can probably imagine, Rusalia was the festival of roses. Celebrated from May to July, it was a festival commemorating the dead, very similar and to a modern akin Dia de los Muertos, which is in November in Mexico as a kind of modern comparison. Families would put roses on their loved ones' graves, and this led us to continuing to do so to this day as a memorial because of this festival. So you can akin leaving flowers on your loved ones' graves to those. It's also known as the Pentecost, which is now a Christian holiday. This celebrates the 49th day after Easter, which sounds like it's unrelated, but hear me out. In history, before Christianity, holidays at this time of year, which is usually mid-June, are very often associated with spirits and fertility, such as Easter that's just passed, for instance. So it made sense that these monsters were named with that in mind. Speaking of which, before we move on, I mentioned that the Rusalka were only able to move about on land for a single week, and that is related to these two holidays. During Rusalia, where the dead were honoured, spirits were able to walk amongst the living, and were able to hang about more freely by their rivery homes in early June, which made them also the most dangerous. It was even named Rusalka Week in honour of them, but swimming was entirely forbidden, and the Rusalka were actually ritually banished at the end of the week as entertainment, and this ran all the way up to the 1930s, if you can believe it. It's otherwise known as Green Week or Whitsuntide Week, and it's often worked into celebrations of Trinity Sunday in the modern era. Now, after all of that etymology, which, amazing, is my favourite etymology I think we've ever done, let's move on to their actual history. Unfortunately, and this is crazy considering how much we had on their etymology, there really isn't much specifically. But we did know that they existed well before the 19th century, or 1800 AD, and that they were most likely from pagan Slavic mythology, which was around during the Middle Ages, so around the 8th to 13th centuries. However, Rusalka belief was persistent up until the 16th century in some parts. This is where we had that original benevolent water fertility spirit version of the Rusalka, and unfortunately, I can't actually find why this is switched over specifically in the 19th century to this evil version. I imagine, and I hate to point the finger, and please, if you are Christian, please do not take offence from this, but it was probably something to do with Christianity coming into the region. The idea of shaming women for being unclean due to something that a man has done to them is pretty common within folklore, but also within a very old-timey Christian belief as well, I'm afraid. So, I'm going to hazard a guess with that. I am hazarding a guess. Please don't hate me for it. I can't find anything else. Of course, though, we do also have their link to Rusalka and to Pentecost, but we also have an expression we can link to the Rusalka. Walks like a Rusalka is applied to girls with unkempt hair in Slavic regions, and is still used today. Rusalki, which by the way is the pluralised version of Rusalka, and their hair are linked to Slavic traditions of unmarried women having unbraided hair, as once they were married, their hair would be tightly braided and would usually be worn under a headdress, so as to be seen with untidy hair would imply that you were unmarried, or potentially a hair-tickling, man-drowning monster. I do, though, have some famous Rusalka stories to share, such as one named Dana from Russian folklore. Her stepmother, of course, was jealous of how beautiful she was, the tale as old as time, and drowned her when they went swimming at a watermill near their house. Dana's husband, of course, mourned her, and one day he stayed late at this watermill where she died, and saw a bunch of Rusalki on the wheels of the mill. Saying mill wheels is really difficult, by the way. That's what I wrote. I just could not get it out of my mouth. But he also saw his late wife. He dived into the water after her, and the Rusalki followed him, tying him up in their hair, and eventually Dana rushed to him and told him to leave before sunrise. And he refused, saying he'd rather die than live without her. So, she kissed him, and he became the Water King of the river. Realistically, probably drowned, but that's the story. Another story is one of Kostroma, who was a fertility goddess linked to Rusalkas, as she drowned herself in a lake when she discovered her new husband was actually her brother. She lured every man who met her to their death, and eventually the gods took pity on her and turned her and her brother into a single beautiful flower. Another Rusalka, Marina, was a young woman who drowned herself in the river Volga out of love for a man, and it was said that she could transform herself into a swan when she swam. She often sat looking at her ex-lover's house, who had married someone else and moved on, and eventually she charmed him and took him underwater to live happily ever after. Again, probably drowned him. Lastly, there's Moriana, who was the daughter of the mythical sea Tsar from Slavic folklore. If you didn't know, a Tsar is a Slavic king. She was incredibly beautiful and had hair like sea foam, and she took the form of a fish when she swam in deep water. She ruled the sea winds and storms, and she came ashore in the evenings to observe humans, which she chose to bless with good or bad sea voyages. In reality, I imagine this folklore tale was to keep people away from riverbeds with large amounts of plant life in that could realistically pull you under. I live nearby a river, this is a fun fact. It's called the River Can, and on sunny days you can see the entire river is just filled with really tall seaweed, and I would not want to swim in it. People go canoeing and kayaking on it and I think they're crazy. Anyway, if you can imagine the Rusalka's hair being the seaweed that pulls you under the water and traps you, I can totally see this as a reason to invent a monster that tempts you into it. Rivers are pretty dangerous now and then, so you have to keep your wits about you. Now, I've already mentioned some mythically similar monsters, such as the sirens already, but these monsters are also very similar to the French Melusine, which the Starbuck siren actually is, by the way, with the split tail. And they sing to tempt people in too, but are typically more benevolent than evil, or at least they want to do it for a benevolent reason. It's more of a, I want to tempt this man into the water to live with me rather than kill him. of course, that does end up with the man dying too. Or there's the Scandinavian Nixie or Nokken, who were the river spirits who would tempt people to live with them underwater, which realistically again meant drowning, but in a more let us love you way again. They were also able to transform into water horses like the Scottish Kelpies too, but you can hear more about them and Kelpies in their own episodes, which both of them were a very long time ago, but worth listening to if you're interested in more of these type of monsters. Now, onto modern media. There are a few bits for Rusalka, and I've topped a few bits up with other siren media, just as they are similar enough. However, if they're too siren-y, I've cut them out. So, for art, have a look at Rusalka from 1928 by Sergei Solomonko, Rusalki from 1879 by Konstantin Mavkovsky, or The Mermaids, or Rusalki in their actual language, by Ivan Kramoskoy from 1871, for some gorgeous portrait art from the Slavic regions. And these do actually portray Rusalka rather than generic mermaids because they are from these regions. Otherwise, have a look at independent stuff. As always, support all of your independent artists. These other people are dead. They don't benefit from it. Probably though, just a tangent, the most famous thing about Rusalka is the opera named after them. If you Google Rusalka, it's the first thing you will see pop up. It is not the folklore monster, it is this incredible opera. If you have a chance to see it, I really recommend it. It follows the story of Rusalka, who was once a princess, who becomes one. If you can find a copy online, not that I would encourage any slime tutorials for any theatre nerds out there. I don't encourage them, but see if you can find one. If you can find a filmed version that's proper, see if you can find it. If you are in the UK, E&O at the Colosseum in London often have this within their opera season in the summer, and their operas are my favourite, so keep an eye out, go see it, it's a beautiful show. In movies, moving on, we have Rusalka, Mavka the Forest Song, The Mermaid, Lake of the Dead, Spaceman, Forest Song, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Siren, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Mermaids, Ice Age, Continental Drift, Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, The 12 Tasks of Asterix, and My Little Pony, Equestria Girls, Rainbow Rocks. For TV, we have The Witcher, Charmed, Tidelands, Supernatural, Red Dwarf, Once Upon a Time, My Babysitter's a Vampire, So Weird, What We Do in the Shadows, Saturday Night Live, Extreme Ghostbusters, The Backyardigans, SpongeBob SquarePants, Arthur, The Simpsons, Lloyd in Space, Martin Mystery, American Dragon Jake Long, Disenchantment, The Godzilla Power Hour, DuckTales, and Aqua Teen Hunger Force. In video games, we have ones such as Heroes of Might and Magic, The Witcher 3, Castlevania, Audio of Ecclesia, Bravely Default, The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing, Axiom Verge, Reverse 1999, and World of Warcraft. Now, moving on to book recommendations, the ones for this week are The Slavic Myths by Noah Charney and Svetlana Slapsak, Slavic Spirits and Demons, Tales of Myth, Legend and Faith by Perun Mountain, and Baba Yaga's Book of Witchcraft, Slavic Magic from the Witch of the Woods by Madame Pamita, for some brilliant Slavic myths, including this one, but also other monsters that we've covered or are yet to cover in this fantastic and very often overlooked world mythology. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? You probably know what I'm going to say for this one if you've been listening for a while, and you're going to say that I'm copping out, but listen. Water monsters are the ones that I am most sure about in terms of existing in reality. Mainly because we've discovered so little of the water, and because we can't follow them into it. Any reports can't be scoped out. I know I sound like a broken record, I'm conscious of it, but it's true. Do I think that there are watery women out there tempting people in with them to tickle them to death? Hey, maybe. maybe it's why perfectly healthy people die in river accidents every year. I used to live on the River Avon, which is a very, very fast-flowing river through Somerset, and a lot of people die there every year. Maybe they're drowning. Maybe they were pulled in by river creatures we don't believe exist. Who knows? But in all seriousness, as summer comes up, please be careful around lakes and rivers at this time of year. They are just so deceptively fast and dangerous, even if you're a good swimmer, so please take caution, even if it means imagining there's a kraken under there to put you off. I know that's what I do, even in pools. I have a weird fear that a shark is going to eat me the whole time, but maybe that's just me. Either way, please be careful around open bodies of flowing water. Please, please, please. I have seen way too many people die all around the UK every summer, so just be careful. Rusalkas, though, are definitely up there as one of my personal favourite water monsters. I love the idea of these wronged women becoming these revenge-driven beasts who tickle you to death and think it's great for them. So, gentlemen, be wary if a woman you think you have wronged invites you into a pool this summer. She might be ready to grab your feet and torture you until you drown with little tickles. But what do you think? Did the Rusalka haunt the rivers, lakes and estuaries of Eastern Europe? Let me know on social media. I would love to know what you think about this one. An absolutely epic monster this week, and I'm so glad we got to cover this one. I love anything sea-based, and that sounds like sea bass, but we especially love a siren or a mermaid-like lady, so it's about time we had the Eastern European variation. Next week, we're heading over to the UK, but to a region we have never been to before. And I feel awful about it, actually. I don't know how anyone's not called me out on this. Because we are going over to the west of the UK, to the beautiful, beautiful country of Wales, for the terrifying Cúna Awen. I'm very excited about this one. There's a lot of Welsh in it, so I may butcher it, but please do join me for these horrendous hounds of hell and keep an ear out for their howling next week. I'm very excited for this one. Now, just as a pre-warning, just as end off the podcast this week, I am off on holiday from May 17th to June 1st, as I'm going to Disney World in Florida for 2 weeks. I'm very excited. If you've been listening to the show for a few years, you'll know that I go to a different Disney park in the world every year, and this time, it's the big one. During this time, there won't be any episodes, but I'll be sure to have one ready for the week I come back on June 5th. So, just as a pre-warning, we're not going to have any episodes for 2 weeks, and this one is actually planned. For now, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got loads of social media for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, and the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod. But I'm also on Blue Sky under Myth Monsters as well, and all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk. But you can find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals. They might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky. And I'll see you later, babes.